Good, Nona?
Yeah.
We'll get underway. Okay, let's get going. Welcome everybody. Bienvenue tout le monde. Bienvenido. My name is Kevin Scarrett, and I've been asked to serve as a moderator, facilitator for today's event. Sorry, I'll speak close to the microphone. And what that really means is I'm going to just describe a little bit about what we're doing this afternoon, and then I'll be introducing a wonderful panel of women who have different perspectives to share about our theme and our discussion this afternoon, which is Precarious Work Without Borders, Myth-Busting on Temporary Foreign Workers. So I'm going to do that introduction. I will say a few things just to set up how we're working. First of all, I'm here in part on behalf of a group called the Workers' Action Group, which is a workers' solidarity and action organization, a committee of the organization called Solidarity Against Austerity. And Solidarity Against Austerity, if you don't know, was one of the lead groups involved in organizing the march and the demonstration yesterday on May Day. And SAA, Solidarity Against Austerity, has been doing that for the last 3 years, since 2012. Within Solidarity Against Austerity and Workers' Action Group, when we have a public meeting like this, we often want to start with an acknowledgement that our event today is happening here on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. This is just a recognition that we offer about the space and the land that we're operating on, and we think that's important. We heard some really interesting words yesterday. For those of you that were there at the May Day, at the opening of May Day, we heard some really powerful words from Claudette Commanda of the Algonquin Nation that was offering the opening blessing for the action yesterday, and that's still in my mind. I'll also say just a quick word about the language of our event. Our speakers will speak in English. J'imagine on n'a pas des francophones dans la salle avec nous aujourd'hui. Est-ce qu'on a des francophones? No French speakers. I was just going to say we will also say if we have French speakers who would like to put questions in French, we can translate them, and we welcome and encourage people to put questions in French. There may be other language speakers in the room, and if anybody wants to put questions in other languages, we can try to figure that out as well. And also we will offer priority to questions and comments from people, from women and from people from underrepresented communities and voices. So let me just add the next piece. I was invited, not just as moderator, but I was sort of invited on behalf of Workers' Action Group to sort of kick off our discussion this afternoon with a few comments and remarks about May Day and the history of May Day and workers' struggles and what its significance might be for the struggles that we're engaged in today as workers, and specifically migrant worker struggles and the struggles of temporary foreign workers and other precarious work. So I'm going to try to do that in 5 minutes or less and see what happens. I will say, you know, as one of the people involved in organizing around May Day here in Ottawa for the last few years, and Stuart, I'll invite Stuart to give me a signal if I go beyond 5 minutes. It's interesting, you know, every time we mark May Day, it's a bit of an unusual thing to mark, and as maybe many of you in the room know, this is something that the broad mainstream of the labor movement does not really do. The mainstream labor movement in Canada and in Ottawa puts more emphasis on Labor Day in September. So it's a bit of a, I would say, a political decision to try to revive the May Day tradition. So why would we do that? I will just say this, where did May Day come from in North America and globally? It's very interesting to look at a bit of the history, and I'm not going to say too much about the history, but I'll say this. It really started with a May Day, on May 1st in 1886 in the United States, at a time when workers' struggles were very focused, and had been for decades, organized worker struggles before there really were many trade unions or left-wing political parties representing workers' interests. there was a lot of struggle over the length of the working day. And in particular, in the middle of the 19th century, there was a fight for an 8-hour working day, because workers were working for 10, 12, 14, 16 hours and more. And some workers were being worked to death for simple length of the working day. And on May 1st, 1886, there was a mass strike in support of the demand for an 8-hour working day in the United States of 190,000 workers. I've seen other estimates that it was even more than that, but hundreds of thousands of workers actually walked off the job and struck for an 8-hour working day. And many thousands of others called off strikes that they had called because their employers had conceded the point. They gave in to the demand for an 8-hour working day. A few days later, after this day of action, there were continuing strikes and activities, and there was an episode of violence with some striking workers and some at a demonstration in Chicago in the United States. I don't want to give all of the history. You can read about it separately, but there were arrests, there was violence, there was a bomb that went off, and a number of radical organizers, anarchists and socialists, were rounded up and arrested and charged, and eventually a number of them were killed. They were hung, and they are known as the Haymarket Martyrs, radical organizers that were known as organizers of workers. And really, out of all of that, there was a lot of struggle in defense of those people that had been taken on. Out of all that, the news of this episode spread across the United States, spread across the world, into Europe, and worker organizations just declared, you know what, we're going to mark May Day as an International Workers' Day, both to celebrate workers' solidarity and also to protest the conditions of work and the continuing exploitation of workers. Now, fast forward to 2015, and I won't say anything about the time in between. What are we facing today in Canada, in Ottawa, and globally? We're facing the continued exploitation of workers, I would suggest, and that exploitation is taking, new and different forms. We're seeing our economic system intensifying the exploitation of workers through attacks on trade unions, attacks on workers' wages and working conditions and pensions, and also on removing public services, public programs. The whole welfare state that was built up, partly through worker struggles, is being undermined and eroded. And it is the weakest and most vulnerable sections of the working class that are losing the most in this, particularly workers without unions, without any collective strength or power of their own. And we see the effects of all of this. So I just say, in that context, I think it's an important context to consider the situation of migrant workers, temporary foreign workers, live-in caregivers. What's going on there? What we're seeing, I guess, make the argument that what we're seeing is an extension of what we've seen throughout history, where employers and governments and powerful classes in our society are figuring out ways to keep workers divided by status, divided by income. Some workers get unions, some don't. And in this case, workers are also divided by their identity, by race, by language. And in the case of temporary foreign workers and migrant workers, they're also divided by legal status. And I guess the point I would make in all of this, and this is something that the people in this room know far better than I do, because I'm not a temporary foreign worker, I'm Canadian, I have full citizenship status and rights. The point I would make, not so much to the folks in this room, but in my dialogue and my discussions with friends and comrades in the labor movement and beyond, is that we need to view this, yes, as a form of exploitation of temporary foreign workers, live-in caregivers, other kinds of migrant workers in Canada and other countries, but also as part of the strategy for keeping workers divided, building resentment between different kinds of workers, in a way that also is a form of attack on non-migrant workers. This is one of the techniques and ways that employers and governments have used for decades. And I would say the only way that we can respond to this is by figuring out strategies to work together, to unify our struggles. Migrant workers, non-migrant workers, temporary foreign workers, workers with status. How we do that, how we figure out how to build movements and trade unions and non-trade union worker organizations that will make that a priority, I think that's the question for us today. And in some ways, that's one of the guiding questions for our panel and our discussion. So I'm just gonna stop there. I hope that sets up a bit of the discussion. We've got a fantastic group of speakers, and maybe I'll just quickly indicate who they are, and then we'll get going. Now, someone will have to guide me. Nona, is Nona here?
Yes, I'm here.
Are we gonna take a musical break before the panel?
We'll take a musical break.
Before the panel, okay. So maybe I'll just quickly say who's on the panel, and then we'll take the musical break. Does that work? Nona?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have with us this afternoon Aimee Beboso, who's right here beside me. Aimee is the chairperson of Philippine Migrant Society of Canada, and she's going to offer thoughts on migration and precarious work in the current global capitalist economy. We also have beside her Joyce, who's going to offer her perspective on life as a temporary foreign worker for the last 6.5 years. And then finally, we have Kelty Cameron with us. Kelty is a colleague of mine. She is an International Solidarity Officer with CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, which is also the union that I work for. And she's going to talk about these issues from her own perspective and from the perspective of the Workers' Action Group that she and I are both involved in. That's our panel. I think it's going to be very good. And before we get to it, Nona's going to guide us with a musical break.
Salamat ho. Thank you very much. So Joe Hill is no longer with us, but nakikita nyo sa song lyrics that he's been an inspiration to a lot of workers and a lot of union organizers. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
Correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So the first song we'll do is about Joe Hill. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I bet you're 10 years dead. I never die, says he. I never die, says he. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. And standing there, as big as life, and smiling with his eyes, Joe says what they could never kill went on to organize, went on to organize.
Sing with us, you can do it.
From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers stand up for their rights, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. It's there you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I bet you're 10 years dead. I'll never die, says he. I never died, says
Yung sunod po na song. We did that in English, now we're going to do one in Tagalog, but it's translated. Meron na eh. Okay. It's called Manggagawa, Worker. And it came out in the 1980s, and it's quite appropriate to talk about the struggles of workers, and so we bring you Manggagawa.
Manggagawa, kayong lumilikha ng yaman ng bansa, kayong malaong ng iginupo ng dakas. Magkaisa at labanan ng pang-api, kahit na libong buhay man ang masawi, walang kailangan kung ang magiging kapalit ay ang kalayaang minimithi. Manggagawa, kayong lumilikha ng yaman ng bansa, kayong malaang ng iginupo ng taas. Magkaisa at labanan ng pang-api, kahit na libong buhay man ang masawi, walang kailangan kung ang magiging kapalit ay ang kalayang magdal ng inimithi. Panahon na mga kasama, ipakita ang lakas ng ating pagkakaisa. Panahon na mga kasama, nang makamtan ng bayan ang tunay na kalayaan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now let's step carefully here. That was wonderful. Thanks, folks. Terrific. So without any further comments, I think we'd like to turn over to our panel. And we're going to start, I think, with Amy.
Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's a very nice day outside, and you're here inside to show your solidarity for workers and maybe maybe learn something. So I decided late last night how to approach this panel. So I thought I'd tell you a story instead. And maybe I'm hoping that this story would give you that global, then Canadian perspective of where things are at in terms of temporary foreign workers, with focus on Filipino migrant workers. So, my family is in the overseas foreign worker business, but the thing is, while still living in the Philippines, I didn't know it was this global, lucrative, but very exploitative business. Then I only saw it and accepted it as it is, a job. A job that my dad, my uncle, and my cousins did. That's where we learned terms like, daddy ko seaman, seaman. So, where I was at, my friend's dad worked in a sugarcane mill and came home every day after work, while my dad happened to work in a desalination plant in Saudi Arabia, and I only got to see him for a few weeks at a time every 2 years. Fast forward some 20 years later, with more schooling and grassroots organizing, thanks to PMSC, I began to understand that there is this global commodification of labor. I learned that countries like the Philippines have a labor export policy. We like acronyms, so it's LEP to me. in place that facilitates the movement of its people to work in countries like Canada as caregivers, meat packers in slaughterhouses, food counter attendants in Tim Hortons. It's not a coincidence I have a Tim Hortons here in front of me. Mushroom pickers, essentially jobs deemed as low-skilled. Therefore, at minimum wage pay and no guaranteed rights and protection. I've learned of the vicious relationship between labor sending and receiving countries. Sending countries deploy workers. More than 5,000 Filipinos now leave the Philippines every day to some 200 countries around the world. Receiving countries take them to build mega, ultra-modern cities like Dubai. Both sides benefiting, yet again, they are not afforded the necessary rights and protection. They are disposable commodities in the capitalist race to amass profit. With the organizing work PMSC has been doing in Ottawa, I learned that care work is still very much gendered. Care work is still associated to be primarily and inherently a woman's job. I learned this after wanting to understand why the hell such a disproportionate proportion of foreign caregivers in Canada are Filipino women. I read it in an assigned journal in a political science 101, my first year at Carleton University. Why the hell 86%? Now it's probably more in the 90s. This cannot be some natural phenomenon. Where's my story? Page 2. Where's my page 2? Oh. The academic in me did my research. I also had the privilege of getting to know our PMSC members. So far, I've learned that a system was created where women of color are accessed as caregivers for a bargain. Canada, without a universal childcare system, had to look elsewhere to provide for the demand for care work for children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. My mom, my cousins, and thousands more women, and many of you in this room, who have entered Canada through this system instead of utilizing their education, skills, and training as teachers, nurses, accountants, doctors, are welcome to work in Canada as low-skilled temporary workers pushed to find a better future for their families and pulled by some pathway to citizenship. I'm still trying to figure out what that pathway is. But while on this pathway, which by the way, after changes introduced late last year, has now narrower guarantees to gaining citizenship, that I've learned from the casework we've been conducting with PMSC members and non-members in the Ottawa area. When things go awry, successful recourse is slim because, again, even when there are, and there are very few, mechanisms in place to uphold workers' rights, very little is being done. But I have hope. After all, you all are here in this room. Employers who are found guilty are, in the end, only receive a slap on the wrist. I didn't hear any Tim Hortons or McDonald's people got arrested, owners of Tim Hortons or McDonald's, when that news broke in the media last year. Did you? Not much deterrent at hiring another temporary foreign worker. Even still, I've learned and witnessed that workers do fight back. Again, you guys are here, right? Your presence is fighting back. I've seen it when we apply for employment standards complaint, right, Joyce? I've seen it when fellow workers help each other out to leave abusive employers, even if it later means losing their own employment. I've seen it at rallies like yesterday, and I know that some of you are not there because you have to work, because after all, no work, no pay.
That's right.
Sad. Workers are doing their part to help, but at the same time, workers are doing their part to dispel the myths. Temporary foreign workers do contribute to the Canadian economy. As workers, they also pay taxes, are deducted CPP and EI. Tell that to people that tell you they're stealing your job. You're stealing their jobs. This is in addition to sending all together the billions of remittances each year to their families, because that's what sustains them. There's no decent jobs in the Philippines. Workers are dispelling that they do not just work harder than Canadian workers. You'd work hard too if it meant losing your job or threatened deportation. They are doing jobs that are temporary. The job is not temporary. That's why we have that hashtag right there for young people over there. Good enough to work, good enough to stay. What is set up, really, what we're looking at, is a revolving door for these temporary workers to meet the desire of employers for fast recruitment of pre-trained workers. It's a lot of savings for this country, rather than spend money to train local workers. These are myths that make us, as workers, pitted against other workers, when really we're supposed to be united to fight the system. What else temporary migrant workers face? Well, long-term impacts. I've come to learn and accept the consequence of migration. The family separation that left my brothers and I with an almost non-existent relationship with our dad, despite reuniting as a family in Canada. But as PMSC we witnessed more family separations and reunification. By then, no longer the family as a whole. Still, family members pick up, because you have no choice. You want to live. Including their children. Some of you are here. Your parents brought you here. Because the system continues to be all the more oppressive. We've seen it as recently as April 1st, when the temporary foreign workers that have reached their 4 years in Canada were asked to leave and cannot return 4 years from now if they so choose. So, that's where things are at in Canada. Now, I turn it over to you, and what the hell are we gonna do about it?
Right on. Well, that's a very good question, and we are going to return to that at the end, but we'll keep moving with the panel. This is Joyce.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat na naririto. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your support in coming here. I'm Joyce from the Philippines, and I'm a mother, a wife, and my children, my husband is not yet here. That's it. I'm here for 6.5 years, struggling. I came here in Canada as a live-in caregiver from Hong Kong through an agency that I paid a total of 5,500 Canadian dollars and 7,000 Hong Kong dollars. My ultimate goal is to bring my family here in Canada and a dream to live a decent, livable life together. On September 10, an employer picked me up at the airport early morning, and I reached their home like almost 3 o'clock in the morning. At that day, 6:30, they wake me up to start my job. So I started my precarious work from that morning. I feel busy because of long travel, and so I started at 6:30 a.m. They have 2 children, which is both very young at that time. I'm not allowed to rest until 3 o'clock, and I asked the wife to let me have a rest because I feel so dizzy and not eating because it's Ramadan and they're Muslim and they did not allow me to eat. So when I stayed in my room for a while, I heard banging on my room and open it. He said I'm not allowed to have a rest until they tell so. It's the husband who came from work at the time. The wife called him to call me in my room. So I work until 9 o'clock in the evening and eat the dinner after that. Then go back to work again. So I presumably work for them like in a week I'm supposed to work for 44 hours, but I work like 60 to 80 hours a week. From Monday to Saturday, I'm working also on Sunday, but they allow me one time to go to a mall which is near to them, a little bit near to them. I walk all the way to Heron Mall, where I met a friend and tell them what's going on in the place where I'm working. Gladly, they listened to me. So from that day, they say, I will tell to PMSC, the organization where AES, where I've been also for quite some time. So after that, when they introduced me to PMSC, it was actually my third Sunday working with that family. So they say, oh, it's really bad. So and they deny me of my OHIP to apply for OHIP and the SIN number at that time. So I talked to them after I talked to PMSC that night that I really need to have my SIN and my OHIP. But instead, they are asking for my passport because they say they were gonna deport me. And they even crumpled my contract because that contract is nothing. They just want me to come here. That's why they make that contract. So 3 people came from PMSC, from QP, and a friend of mine. They rescued me. It was Judy, Kelty, and Marie. So they are so furious at the time, but that's what happened. They're always yelling me from time to time and make me work so long hours without paying me. And they only pay me like 1 week for that more than 3 weeks that I work. But we filed it at the labor sector in Ministry of Labor. And because we filed a little bit late, they only gave me 1 week salary, which is 360 at the time. So we didn't able to get all those overtime hours and even the 2 weeks that I worked for them. So and the first thing when they called me from Ministry of Labor, they asked me if I have a witness to prove what I'm doing there, what they're doing to me. So how can I get a witness? There's only the husband and wife and the 2 children, which is, just an infant and toddler. So what happened to me is, when I left them, I looked for another job. I thought it's just easy because I have an open work permit. But it turns out 10 months before I got another job. So what will I gonna do on that 10 months? I have no money, I have no place to live. It's just that somebody let me live on their house, without paying for the time. It's a Filipino which I encountered on my first time going to a mall, which is the Heron Mall gate. So, and then when I got my second employer, they stayed for only 5 months. I also worked there for like a long time, like longer hours. But they're nice people. It's just that even if you are at rest, they are bothering you from time to time, those children that I work with. And then my third employer is, she lost her job. I worked there for only 7 months. So all those gaps, you have to apply for another working permit, and they have to apply for the labor market opinion at the time. So it takes longer. So that time, it's only 3 years for a living caregiver for you to finish and apply for open permit or permanent residency. But since of the gap, I almost didn't make it. But thanks to Migrante groups that we got like 4 years instead of 3 years. I almost not finished it. It's like 4 months before 4 years, I finished the living caregiver program. And then after that, after I got my open permit, I didn't able to work as a full-time employee in a hotel. They get me as part-time, but I cannot work like with many hours. So I'm going to pay my rent, my bills and everything. So how can I get my, my finances? It's the negative thing of being an often permit holder. And then lately, I found out, then I work now as a sales associate, but still not getting much hours. And then now, the latest thing that I knew is that when you don't have a full-time job, you cannot get the OHIP, so you cannot get services. That's the thing. In my 5 employers that I work with, there's a lot of abuses that I got, like longer hours, verbal abuses from children and from the parents. So I don't know what to do. Like I'm now in the middle of chaos. Like what is saying here that like you have to stay. Yeah. It's not easy to leave your family behind, My children lives without a mother figure. I'm sorry. To work in a precarious place is next to burden. Aside from thinking about your family. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No problem.
So it's what we're looking for here is a justice to all migrant workers, good enough to work and good enough to stay with your family at the same time. Because nowadays when I'm working as a sales associate, they are, I can say they're racist, or accept it. We are brown colors, and we're not giving a chance to be to work to our fullest. Yeah. So still, I am on struggle. Yeah, waiting for my family. I hope someday, the nearest future, I will be with them. It's just that I'm afraid because it seems that I'm a stranger to them now.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, the most important is the family unit. But what can you do? The country where I've been is that don't have like a decent job for people out there, even if you are professional and you finish your study. So I'm appealing to all of you to let's stand in solidarity to finish this, precarious situation of the migrant workers. Not only migrant workers, but all of the workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. An incredibly powerful story. I'll just say one comment as I pass the microphone to Kelty. I found Joyce's reporting of the hours of work question particularly powerful, and I've heard this from other migrant workers and live-in caregivers. Isn't it interesting that, when I said at the beginning that the struggle around May Day in 1886 was in part a struggle for an 8-hour day. And we know from Joyce and from others that the struggle over work time and a reasonable, healthy work day continues today. In some ways that struggle is getting worse for some workers. And then you flip from being overworked for too long a day to then being given a part-time job where you don't get enough hours to get enough pay to survive. And this is sort of the game that employers play with workers today. anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. Now we have Kelsey.
Thank you. And thank you, Joyce and Ivy, for sharing your stories and your perspectives. The perspective I bring to this discussion, well, hopefully it'll be an opportunity for a bit of an exchange, but the perspective I have is, well, I work for a trade union. I do the international solidarity work. I also am a member of the Workers' Action Group and a longtime member of the Philippine Solidarity Movement. And I'm certainly speaking on behalf of the Workers' Action Group here today, and not necessarily, not at all actually, the perspective of my day job. But I certainly bring that perspective into this discussion. And I think that, you know, I just want to acknowledge what we're talking about in terms of migration and the temporary foreign worker program in Canada is nothing, it's not new. There's always been migration and there's always been different iterations of different programs and waves of movement of people depending on the economics and what is needed in this country. And we're in a particular moment right now that is particularly exploitive in our history, I think, but I don't think it is unique to our history. And you know, want to acknowledge the significance of April 1st and the campaigning that took place with PMSC, and also the coalition of migrant organizations in this country that came together around the Migrant Alliance for Change to really reach out and expose what was happening, and not just expose, but also support workers who were facing deportation, you know, in ways that we haven't seen before. And in times of austerity and economic crisis, like, there's always going to be efforts by the elite to divide workers, and that's exactly what's happening right now in a very particular way. And I think that, you know, from the perspective of the Workers' Action Group, our priority, our task is to try to find ways to express that as being the root of what's happening here, and also figure out ways for us to come together and have critical exchanges and really see how it's playing out in Ottawa and creating spaces where we can build solidarity. You know, I laugh, but it's not very funny. You know, in this country, the Harper government suggested that the changes to the temporary foreign worker program that have taken place recently were in the interest of supporting Canadian workers. And this is not a man that has any interest in supporting Canadian workers. And it's just not just the man, it's the ideology behind his actions, and it's the party that he is a leader of. They absolutely, in every corner, every opportunity will undermine workers' rights, and are doing it very systematically and very clearly to the organized trade union movement, to the quote-unquote unorganized precarious workers, making people a lot more precarious. They're, you know, making efforts so that workers who are now unemployed have a harder time to gain access to unemployment insurance. And then at the same time, they're making changes to the temporary foreign worker program so that they then are freeing up what I would argue is a pool of labor where, in a time where we have an economic crisis, where there is a large pool of unemployed people, migrants are being scapegoated, right? It's an effort to actually, and this is what migrant organizations have been saying for a long time, that, you know, this is a way to detract from what's really happening in the economy. And, you know, we're coming into a federal election, and the economy is tanking, and there's no investment in anything. So it becomes very easy in that context to then just change the program. And this is why the temporary foreign worker program exists, so that you can, in times of need, you can just, you know, sort of get rid of a group of workers and then, you know, use it as kind of a bargaining chip. And that really is what's happening. And it's something that we need to really address clearly. I'll just share with you briefly, I was in New Brunswick recently, and we had a discussion, and it was in New Brunswick, in Fredericton, And it was a room full of people from across the province, Maritimers, and the question was posed, how many of you know someone that has migrated to the west of the country in search of employment? And I'd say 3/4 of the room put up their hands. And so the point is, if you ask the same question in the Philippines, how many of you have a family member or friend that has migrated to Canada or to Saudi Arabia or to wherever, Hong Kong, in search of employment, you'd have the same number of people put up their hands, and arguably the same thing would happen in Mexico. People are migrating. And then when asked, well, why are people migrating from New Brunswick to the West Coast? Well, unemployment, underemployment, paying for tuition, post-secondary education. Well, if you ask any temporary foreign worker in this country why they're here, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who's not trying to pay for the education of their kids, right? And it's the exact same situation in places like New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia in this country. And I think that's a really important opportunity for us to build some solidarity and to start expressing what are the roots of migration and how is it used as a tool by the elite to extract what they need from workers. But and at that same forum, someone got up, actually quite courageously, with quite a reactionary position, but an important one, because I think it's it's a position shared by a lot of people in this country. That he said, well, what do migrant workers contribute? How do they contribute to our society? Do they invest in our society? Like they're sending all their money home. They're not investing in the Canadian, the system here, the economic system. So the first way to respond to that was, well, they're paying into CPP, they pay employment insurance and taxes, and they'll never be able to avail of it. So there's on the very surface that it's an incorrect position. But the other way to consider it as well is that it does expose the fact that because migrants aren't able to bring their families here, because they're not given permanent resident status, it's true that what they're here to do is to support their families in other countries. And it's not the fault of migrants, but it does expose the intentions of the program to have absolutely zero consideration for communities and society in general, but it's for employers. And it's not just for any employers, it's for the largest employers on the planet, like McDonald's, Subway, the Shell, the oil and gas, or RBC, Tim Hortons. Because, when you look, because if they were really interested in investing in communities as a government, well, they wouldn't have this program. People would be allowed to come where there was work, and they would be allowed to stay, and they would be allowed to bring their families, and they would be allowed to invest in the communities where they live. But unfortunately, the program does create that situation. But so it became a really important discussion with someone who shared a view of many people that, migrants are, and it's an incorrect view, but migrants are a drain on the economy. But it also becomes important as well because this was a worker who was struggling himself. He was looking for work and or had part-time status and was precarious himself, which is something that's important as well in this discussion, because the people that often share what are very racist, xenophobic, anti-migrant views are also the ones that we need to engage and to build solidarity with in really important ways, because they're struggling in the same system that migrants are. On that point, I think from the perspective of and I'll wrap up, the part of the challenge, I think, is for a group like the Workers' Action Centre and to have a discussion is to be able to hear from migrants about the experiences where being able to create safe spaces where we can talk about the the harassment and the oppression and the repression that people experience on a daily basis. Because part of the divide and rule is not just a one time in an economic crisis. The divide and rule is about racism in the workplace on a daily basis, which Joyce just made reference to in her job right now, and it's based on gender, and it's based on a host of identities that are very real and express themselves in different ways. And then there's an economic basis for these divide and rule strategies, which we see amongst workers. And so I think what we need to do here in Ottawa, as the Workers' Action Group, as PMSC and others, is to try to figure out a way to create a real network that we're able to bring together the people that are struggling on the basis of the precarious work and their workplace experiences, and also create a space where we can really have those discussions where we're able to really grapple with some of the ways that it's racism and that anti-migrant sentiment is being expressed. And in the labor movement, in the trade union movement, you know, part of the reason why the Harper government did put forward the position that this is for Canadian jobs is because a lot of the trade unions have put forward that position as well, that it's Canadian jobs first.
Right.
And so then you saw that being echoed in the government position as well. But in practice, I think what we really need to do is to think about what, not only dispelling that, but how we actually dispel the myth that it's not just about Canadian jobs first, it's about investment in the communities, it's about good jobs. You know, there's people here in Canada that need a living wage and access to services, and migrant workers need a living wage and access to services. And not all employers are the same. The multinationals is not the same as the fish plant in New Brunswick, where the government should be subsidizing these so that they are able to pay a living wage and they are able to attract jobs. So I think that there's I would like to see in the future, you know, we're going into the federal election too, and the labor trade union movement has positions around the CPP. Well, I think they should be talking about the fact that migrant workers pay into the CPP and they can't avail of it. Or childcare. You know, Migrante, when they talked about the changes to the living caregiver program, called for a national childcare program, a public program, that if there was legitimate jobs, that immigrants should be brought in to work, which is correct. And then the other platform of the central labor body is jobs and decent work. You know, if we want to talk about that, we need to talk about permanent residence status upon arrival for all workers, and create an investment strategy that doesn't undermine decent work. So I think I'll leave it there, but I think it would be good to have thoughts about, you know, how we can build a network in Ottawa. We had a discussion on March 8th. This is a continuation of that, but ways that we can really figure out what things look like in Ottawa. What does precarious work look like here? How are migrants struggling in this city? And what can groups do and activists do to really take the lead from migrants, but also we have a responsibility to initiate, campaigns and activities. So I think that's for some discussion, but I'd really like to see a network be established so that we can continue this discussion. Thanks.
Terrific, thank you, Kelsey. And let's
Help
just
yourself,
move right
please.
on into some discussion. I'll just throw in as a question for us all to consider, picking up on what Kelsey just said. And some of you in the room may have questions you want to put to our panelists or to Kelsey. But I really think the theme of our discussion in many ways, as Kelsey just said, is, you know, how can we in Ottawa, based here, living here, working here, how can we continue to build some kind of network, some kind of organization? And I'll just say, you know, the trade unions in Ottawa and in Canada struggle around some of these issues for the exact reason Kelsey just said. I think some of us can continue to try to generate discussion and dialogue with the existing trade union movement. But one of the things I found so powerful and interesting about Joyce's story is that it illustrates that for migrant workers, for live-in caregivers, and certain temporary foreign workers, the organizations that they have turned to are organizations like PMSC and Migrante Canada. Those aren't trade unions. They're different kinds of organizations, independent organizations that are ending up serving a similar function. And I would just say that it seems clear to me that we're going to have to be thinking about creative, different kinds of organizations, not just formal structured trade unions. And that's particularly in a context when, in Canada, union representation is in long-term decline. Like, we are struggling to have trade unions organized, and employers and governments are attacking trade unions. It's harder than it's been in a long time to even organize a trade union. So that's partly where Workers' Action Group comes from, and I think there's similar dialogues happening in other cities about, well, what do we do about this? It's not just going around and trying to organize workers into unions. In some of these categories, that's not going to work. So we need different organizations, different kinds of ways to get together, and we should talk about what that would look like, what people think would work. Okay, I'll stop there. Anybody in the room have any comments, questions they would like to put to the panel, or comments on the question that I'm kind of throwing in about what do we think we need, especially here in Ottawa, where most of us are living and working. What do we think we need to do or see? And yeah, we've got a microphone over in the corner.
I was wondering, since we've all kind of heard the stories about everybody in trade unions and everybody kind of participating and organizing everybody, one idea that I thought about was, why not start a live-in caregiver cooperative and then basically run by migrant workers themselves. I know there's a provincial nominee program where you can nominate someone to get permanent residence. Just, I don't know, I'm just throwing out kind of different ideas that could possibly be something short-term that may lead to a bigger organization.
That's a good question, good point. Does anybody want to respond to that idea, or should we take a couple of questions? Let's take a couple of, if anybody has any other questions. Anybody else want to throw something in? Stuart.
Thank you all for your presentations. I learned a lot of stuff. I thought permanent residents could get over it. So that's something new to me. But I've spoke on this issue at a CLC convention where there was a resolution by the labor movement, it wasn't bad, of trying to work supporting migrant workers. There's an example, UFCW, of farm workers in Ontario. But to answer some of the things, like I always try to use the example of Cup W, when casual workers were brought in, the union initially fought them and everything, and then they finally realized that was a reactionary bad tactic. So they went and bargained for same benefits and salary as full-time workers, so it eventually became not in the interest of the employer to do that. So if, it's an analogy of you support foreign workers here being exploited, explain it just as Amy did, as part of the overall capitalist system, and that we should, international solidarity, this is what we do at home.
Good point. Oh.
I don't have a question, but I'd like people to actually introduce themselves, only because I want to have a sense of everyone has something to say, everyone has an experience, and I just wondered where people are coming from.
Sure, so let's have a go around. People in the room, it's a small enough group. Yeah, I mean, only if you're comfortable, but just maybe indicate your name and, a word or two about who you are or what you're doing, or if you're involved in any organization. Stuart, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'm Stuart Ryan. I work for a QP local at Carleton University, and I'm a member of a new union called Unifor here in Ottawa, across the country as well.
Okay. Good. Do we need to use the mic? Could people shut up?
Yeah.
Use the mic. Okay.
Practice for rallies.
Very good.
Yes, my name is Fides, and my mother is from the Live-In Caregiver program. So we were brought here 20 years ago. She worked about 4 years before she was able to bring us here. And actually, I have a comment about the Mythbusting. Anyway, well, the thing is, you know how there's only the 4 years limit, and for me, the myth is that Canadians are stealing. Oh no, the other way around. Temporary foreign workers are stealing the jobs of Canadians. So let's just say, well, the last time I looked at the unemployment rate was 7%. Is that about around there? So we have to ask, okay, in that 7%, what kind of jobs are those unemployed looking for? Okay, so let's just pretend, okay, so Nortel let go of some people. So are they looking for mushroom picking jobs? We know that from Stats Canada, we saw that majority of temporary foreign workers are from the goods producing industries, accommodation and food services, service producing industry sectors. So it looks like if the job is not being created for those unemployed people, it's not going to solve the problem of that 7%. So it goes to show that putting a limit to 4 years, it's not going to. It's almost arbitrary.
It's not going to affect.
It's just an excuse. It's almost an excuse that, okay, oh, we solved the problem by putting a limit to 4 years, but really, it's not going to do anything.
Very good point. Let's keep going. Feel free.
So, hello everyone. I am Patrick, and I am a member of AnakBayan-Ottawa. So, I came here in 2009, and my mom is from a caregiver program as well. And yeah, I'm a student. And I can feel the same way, being far, away from my mom for about 10 years, because she worked in Hong Kong and moved here in Canada. So, we kind of relate, and so it was nice hearing that story. Thank you.
Very good.
Hi, I'm Maridel. I came here as live-in caregiver. It took me 2 years to get my permanent resident, which is before they took 6 months, but been working more harder and harder. Yeah, and then it's really hard to find a job if, regular job, and some member of PMSC, and they helped me a lot when I got here, because I know nobody here in Ottawa, and they helped me to have, because when I was a live-in caregiver, I lost my confidence. Back home, I finished a degree in mathematics, but I can't use here. And sometimes if some people know I'm live-in caregiver, they try to stay away from me. So they start to not to be friend of me if they're other nationalities. So I'm so glad that PMSC welcomed me, and now I trust, start to have my own confidence. Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
How did you learn about PMSC? How did you find out about it?
Correct.
So what happened, I was in Divisoria. It's a name of a market, Divisoria Market.
The store, okay.
Store. And then I was looking for a group. And then I think I've met Amy first. And I think I have a question regarding how to apply for open work permit. So because they're holding teaching what things to do and all this stuff, and even taxes too. So that's why I know that.
Oh, it's very good. It's just interesting to hear that a store can become like a cultural and a community center, right?
Yeah, well, the owners are PMSC members.
I know. Okay, thanks.
Where are they originally, or did they become?
Next
Oh, they're
up.
originally.
Hello everyone, my name is Romnek. My mother sponsored us actually 13 years ago. Luckily enough that I had to reintegrate myself at a very young age, and like others who are part of the PMSC or the OCHRP that I was also a part of. I was actually doing a lot of research about temporary foreign workers, and I'm actually at Carleton, and I did a case study with Maria Victoria Venancio. I don't know if you've heard of that. It was in the news, I think, a couple of months ago, where she was struck going to McDonald's in, I think it's in BC or in Alberta, and she didn't have any benefits, medical coverage, and now she's ended up quadriplegic. So those are the questions that I'm actually raising into. What are their protections? Do they have any coverage if they were in an accident outside their work? And they're paying CPP and EA as well, so they're contributing blatantly in our Canadian economy, but they don't have any benefits at all if they get hurt.
That's a very good point. Health insurance, long-term disability, these various things.
Yeah.
Good question. Let's keep rolling.
List is getting longer.
Yeah.
I will invite you to exercise your legs and couple more.
Okay, I'm Mary Jane. I work as a live-in caregiver, but I'm here since 2011. But I work, I think somebody here knows my story already. About 2011, I worked 8 months on my employer as a live-in caregiver, but in my contact is different. So I work in their office as a service staff, and at home, because it's ambassador, so I work at home as a nanny. Yeah. So as of now, I work as still live-in caregiver, but I have an open permit, but I didn't use it first because if I go live out, I pay my rent, I pay everything, but I can afford, so I still live in for my employer, but it's okay for them to live. I'm not paying my room anymore, but still I'm there for them to live, keep a little bit savings, but not enough savings, but sometimes you spend if you have, some emergency to the Philippines, you have to use it first. We cannot keep it for long. So, as of now, as a live-in caregiver is also lots of struggle because I'm a mother of 3. So still struggle. I have a young one, 4 years old only. I left them, my youngest I left 4 months old when I came here into Canada. So a lot of struggle for me as a mother. It's very hard. So I don't want to cry again when I think of my family. So, but still, work until I get my permanent residency. But who knows how long it is? Because they say only 36 months to get your permanent residency. But I don't know how long is the 36 months for me to wait for that long. Because I have my family to wait to come here. But it's very hard. So hopefully the system or the immigration or the something policy make more faster than they say that's the rules how to take your permanent residency, but keep on waiting for it.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Anyone else?
Hello everybody. I'm Nida Braga. I came here in Canada as a live-in caregiver through my sister. I came from Saudi Arabia. Now, today is my 2nd year in Canada. Yeah. So now I'm preparing for my permanent resident.
Yes. Very good.
I think that's all.
That's it. Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else? No pressure, folks, but if you want to.
Okay. Hey, I'm Luke. I have relatives that went through the living caregiver program. And I volunteer at different organizations like PMSC and known as Illegal Ottawa, working on Sanctuary City. And we also try to, for folks who are facing deportation, we try to teach them rights and how to deal with the border agency, and protect them from being deported, and try to get them lawyers and all that stuff. So, yeah, and I'm a worker right now at the Canadian Centre for Sexual Diversity. Cool.
Excellent, thanks.
We have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Chris Wojcik, and I'm a member of the Ottawa District Labor Council, and I'm here with Joyce and Elaine. I'm nervous. One thing that was painfully clear is the myths that surround temporary foreign workers and precarious workers. And I think, if anything, those myths have to be challenged. And, you know, as a starting point, people who are here is like, how do we even get that started? Because the myths are what's stopping a lot of things. And Harper, you know, he's just despicable. And all of the, you know, we all know this, I'm preaching to the converted. But this has been excellent for me to hear these stories. I've heard Joyce speak before, but just fabulous to get this information. And definitely the myths need to be dispelled. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Very good. Straight around the microphone.
Thank you very much, Amy, for inviting me. My name is Susan Teodoro. I arrived last 1984. My boss brought me here. I struggle a lot, but I'm a fighter. I know my right. When I had my problem, I had to phone the immigration. Originally, before PMSC was formed, I was a member of the Ottawa Multicultural Homemakers. That was the name of the organization before, OMHA. We were about almost 400 members, and I was very active. I was in the newspaper when we had a rally. I still have it. But as I said,
And you're still here.
as I said, I'm very thankful that PMSC is still there, because we started it. I was part of it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
Let's start from
Next up, no pressure, but
No
if you
pressure.
but if you want to just
Okay.
say even just your name.
Just the name.
Hi, I'm Elaine. How could I start myself? I guess I started as a, my mom is a migrant workers, and I'm a migrant worker when I came here, and it's hard.
It's hard.
Because Joyce, I experienced that as a child of a migrant worker. Sorry. My parents are separated, but I raised my family when my mom is away. So I don't have a childhood while my mom is away. But it's painful to hear that for 25 years, it's still happening. And I'm now a social worker, a very active labor unionist. I'm from Local 454, and I'm lucky that I have a president from my union that really wants to hear the story of migrant worker. And I become active in joining the Ottawa District Labor Council. And I'm also part of the migrant ministry from our church, the Pilipinong church, because they go to church on Sunday, and I have to be there to even just to give support for those workers, because I think they need someone who can hear their costs and needs. I hardly introduce myself as a professional. I always introduce myself as a community worker. And when they ask help, then I know the feeling of Joyce, and that's why it's hard to listen, because it's been ongoing, and this has to stop. And I encourage our brothers and sisters here that we need to work as one and not as a separate individual, because that's the experience in labor union. That, you know, I'm really sad when a worker make comments negatively against migrant workers, because they don't really understand
I don't really angry because they're very negative, but at the same time, I, as part of the migrant community, I need to educate those people, meaning we need to be open in terms of dialogue, not to be, I have this notion that he's not my enemy, the system is our enemy, and we need to continue working together and support each other so that we can bring change, social justice in this country.
Fantastic comment.
I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Simone. I'm also involved with Solidarity and Sincerity in the Workers' Action Group. There's just one more myth I wanted to bring forward, and I think we've heard the stories that counter that myth. And that is, Kevin and myself, we know someone who came here as a migrant worker, living caregiver program, still working, is now a resident, but still in precarious work, and has recently had a baby, and is trying to figure out how she's going to be able to, work and support a baby. And when I was talking to people I know about the situation, the comments that I heard were, well, it's different because she may end up having to go back home to her family and leave the baby there and come back to Canada. And people were saying, well, it's different because, culturally that's different. That's how, leaving your family behind, leaving your children to be raised by parents. It's different in some cultures, and that's, and I was shocked.
Filipino.
Like, in Filipino culture, it's different. And I'm like, I don't think it's any different from any mother or father who has to leave their children and have that separation. It's a system that is forcing that. So I would say there's another myth to bust, and that by bringing over migrant workers to Canada, not because, that having that separation, making it difficult for having, to be able to become a permanent resident, to making it difficult for family reunification. There's no cultural, there is no difference that that tearing apart families makes it any easier than anyone else from anywhere else. It's just complicated.
Wow, very good point. Anyone else? No? Go ahead.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am here in Canada. I am not a foreign worker. I am not a migrant, so that's why I am so aware for talking like this, and there was a video or whatever, because my status is a temporary resident visa as a representative of a foreign worker. This is a big frustration to my daughter and to the whole family. I know that there are so many knows what is the story of my daughter, because it's too hard. But as what I have heard, it's too hard for having a migration here in Canada. But so many here are citizens of Canada. They are migrants. They start foreign migrants, become citizens. It's too hard now for me, a temporary foreign worker. My daughter came here, have a contract to her employer, or have some legal rights and responsibilities. But for being disabled now, we are here struggling in Ottawa. We came from another province, which is, I cannot see, for some protection for the foreign worker. So that's why we wrap up to come here, as long as we have a temporary dwellings. And now we are handling so much here now in the legal aid Ontario, with my hope is to have the rights and the justice, because I know there was a violence. It's hard now. Our goal is not to stay here in Canada as long as the government didn't grant with us, because we are stranger here. But as long as she had the justice and the rights, we are easy to going back home, because we are not a citizen here. We are not a natural citizen here, but of course my daughter is a natural citizen here in Canada. Even now for having a health services, it's too hard now for us, because we want to have a second opinion, or to have with the labor law, because when I go to the social services, to the Service Canada, the agent there asked me that why my daughter was, her last work is May 20, that my daughter was in a life support already. So it's too much hardship, but the federal with the Service Canada is the one having with us with the CPP. My daughter was not also qualified for having a CPP because she never met with the 4 years to 6 years contribution. But as long as she had in the social security, but I am so much thankful to myself that there was an ancient welfare I had, that I have that rights, and there was teaching with me. I have, as what Alice told, she is a fighter. I am also a fighter here because my daughter come here in a legal way. For those having the recruiter heard in Canada, it was the one who was stopped. There's no temporary foreign worker comes here because as what Joy's story is, she paid a lot to come here. My daughter also is like that. But I am so thankful that I have my strength and courage to expose that, because the foreign workers was working here, they are paying for that money, but who is the one having that money? It was the whole world, not only here in Canada. So for those temporary foreign workers, I advise with them, Canada is not for them if they are deported, just like with us also. Now we are struggling here for everything, social services, health services, the financial, for everything. My daughter is an acquired brain injury that she didn't have an accident. She had a blindness now, and as what I am fighting for is physiotherapist is a professional that told with me that why she had a dislocation of the right side. So that's why we are here now struggling. If there was a solidarity against austerity and Migrante Canada, I am here, of course, as what Ate Ellen told that we are not an enemy. Of course, I was only in so much frustration and emotional because she didn't tell the exact story, who is she or whatever. So it's too hard now for having a trust, and now it's too hard for the life of my daughter because she is so much isolated. So that's why we are struggling. I am struggling for myself, for my own, to go anywhere, what government agency trying to call or whatever, and go for my personal with no one, because I am here to fight for what is the justice and rights of my daughter. But of course, how many governments is the Philippines and the Canadian government? It's too hard, especially with the Philippines government. Here in Canada, it's too easy for me. But in the Philippine government, I don't think so.
Right. Well, thank you very much for these words. This is another
Yes,
powerful
because
story.
I know Canada is good for some others, for some migration here, because it's a fair for the justice, for the health, or for the education, or for whatever. So that's why so many Filipino are struggling here in Canada. But hopefully, I will have the rights and justice. Thank you for everyone.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I think we've heard some really powerful stories from those in the audience. Unless I don't see any other hands, I wonder if our panelists might want to offer just any further final words or comments based on what they've heard, and in particular, just turning to this question of how our organizations can continue to cooperate and build here in Ottawa a network, as Kelty said, or an ongoing commitment to providing support to the workers that are finding themselves in these situations, but also a political voice and an organized voice to challenge Canadian policy that we've heard about, and to challenge employers as well, and to help workers stand up for their rights. So maybe I'll just go down the panel. Amy first.
Okay, another myth busting. Before I offer some, I guess, closing remarks. Mary Jane mentioned that she can't live outside of her employers because she can't afford it. So I guess what we need to correct in that or fix is, you know, if only you were paid a living wage, you'd be able to live, and not even bring your family here. So, you know, the challenge to us is that we need to not accept it as is, that, you know, I can't afford it, but go beyond that and ask, why can't I afford it? Also, so as a close, I guess, well, you know, you're here today, it's a challenge. Now you can't say that there are no organizations that exist wanting to come together to fix something. So it has also had to come from you to make a commitment to whether joining Workers' Action Group, PMSC, or OCHRP, or all of the above. You have to make a commitment because you know that there are things that needs to change.
Very good.
Hi, it's not easy to talk here in front of you. It's really, it's been, I think I talk a lot of, you know, forum or things like this, like maybe 6 times already, but still I'm bursting out. I don't know why. I'm trying not, that's why I don't have my hand free, because I will not. I didn't even talk a lot of it, I stopped already, so. Yung ginawa kong assignment is hindi ko natapos basahin. I didn't able to read all of it. There's still a lot of things in here, but I didn't able. But I think the gist is there. So what I'm panawagan, like sa ating mga kasamahan, is that we have to stand together to, you know, if you really need something to change, we have to have a solidarity, like this action group. So after this, I will talk with the Migrante-Ottawa. I am now a member of Migrante-Ottawa, so we'll try to talk about this and yeah, what you said, make a commitment or something like that. I will back to you next time.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas.
I guess first I appreciated the sharing from everybody and want to acknowledge like the link and the experiences of family separation, second generation, the experiences of second generation here in Canada, and also, you know, the loss of the credentials and the de-skilling that takes place in the process of migrating to Canada are very real experiences and part of the cycle that is ongoing in terms of the discussions also that we need to have, because the struggle continues even after the permanent resident status is gained, right? And so status is one step that does mitigate the exploitation, certainly, but it doesn't address the ways that it has undermined, you know, the social fabric of people's lives, and you know, Joyce mentioned being strangers to your kids, and like these all have an impact, and also have an impact and actually contribute to what we've seen a little bit here, talked about a little bit, is also the pattern or the trajectory of once people get their permanent resident status, they still become precarious workers in other ways, either through 2 or 3 jobs, working, sort of permanent part-time, or, and these are unionized jobs, and that speaks to the bigger picture of the changes and patterns in the labor market and globally. And it's true, I mean, there's a debate going on globally, like, migrant workers are really a cog in a wheel of a $4 billion industry, where there's discussions about, development aid being funded by migrant remittances because it is such a lucrative business that, corporations can gain access to the remittances of migrants to then go and, address the conditions of poverty, which is completely is a major contradiction, because it's the conditions of poverty that have forced people to leave the country in the first place, and now the migrant remittances are going to go back into the country to the NGOs and big corporations to then fix the problem of poverty. It's just completely backwards. But I think that, as a real starting point, I mean, certainly PMSC has participated in the workers' action groups, and I think we certainly need, representation of the migrant community around that table, and also as a way to make those links, with other communities in Ottawa that we need to be better at connecting with, and there's still a lot of work that we can do. And also, I think that the idea, just to address your point around the co-ops, I think those are interesting discussions that have taken place in other cities where you create associations. Sometimes the trade unions have been involved, sometimes not. It becomes a situation of who's your employer, and these are invisible workers. But the point being is they emerge out of discussion and they emerge out of struggle, and it has to make sense. So maybe that would be a good idea, but the question is it's about building power. So if it builds our power and it somehow is effective in creating a way for us to really challenge the policies and the practices of the government, but also make the links with the global situation. This is a capitalist system that is this, the movement of people, you're the super exploited. So we need to also address that. So, but I think ideas like that help us to have those conversations, and also help us to figure out ways to be creative about how we can. And then just finally, you mentioned a couple campaigns which I think are important. So, there's the Justice for Vicky, which, did you mention that campaign, or I don't know if somebody did. And maybe I'll ask, maybe you could speak to that, and also, or maybe you could speak to, is it the Justice for Vicky campaign that you were speaking?
Yeah.
Yes. And then also, I think that is the campaign that we should highlight. It's a caregiver who has been denied access to health care after working for McDonald's and being hit by a car on the way to work, and is facing deportation. Full stop. So there is something, and there are opportunities coming up, as I understood it, to lobby the Canadian government and have the opposition parties speak out against this. So I think that may be a good way for us to both take the lead as a workers' action group, take the lead from migrants who are the cry of migrants needs to be heard, and we need to express our solidarity, but also it's not for the migrants to keep telling your stories, and it's not for you to have to, it's not only your responsibility to access justice, so we have to also initiate those processes. So that's, I think, what we're trying to do as the Workers' Action Group, and I think that there's important ways we can do that in the future.
Fantastic, thank you everybody, and we will wrap up with a little final music interlude connected to May Day. Go ahead, Nona.
Yes, all of you have the song sheet, so please sing with us. It's international, it's the song of the International Workers Movement, which is quite appropriate for the occasion, but it's in Tagalog, so the Tagalog speakers need to step up as well. And Stuart, I know you said this before. There you go. After the silence.
Bangun sa pagkakapusan, bangun, alipin ng gutom. die.